Welcome to the deep dive. So, what we do here is take a whole bunch of information, could be articles, research, sometimes, like today, a whole book, and we boil it down to the really crucial stuff just for you. We're diving deep into the ideas of Timothy Ferriss based on his book. We've got the PDF right here as our source.
Okay.
And the mission, really, for you listening, is to get a handle on his core philosophy. How do you design a life that gives you more freedom? Freedom of time, freedom of location.
And crucially, not necessarily by becoming some kind of mega millionaire. That's kind of the surprising part.
Exactly. We want you to get the key insights fast, but also, properly understand it and maybe find a few surprising things along the way.
Yeah, and just to set the scene, the author himself is, well, he's got a pretty wild background.
All right.
Yeah, cage fighter, holds a world record in tango. He's lectured at Princeton.
Fight the mix.
It really signals that this isn't going to be your typical business advice. He comes at life and work from a really unconventional angle.
Totally. Okay, so let's get into it. One of the first things Ferriss tackles is that question we all get asked, right? So, what do you do?
Ah, yes. The standard opener.
And his answer, well, it changes constantly. Depending on when you ask him, he might be, I don't know, racing motorbikes in Europe or diving in Panama or maybe dancing tango down in Buenos Aires.
And the key thing here is he wasn't living like some trust fund kid to do this, not in the usual sense anyway.
Right. He talks about his own journey going from these brutal 14-hour workdays.
Making, what, like $40,000 a year?
Yeah, something like that. And transforming it into, well, what sounds kind of impossible, a 4-hour week, pulling in $40,000 a month.
It's a staggering difference.
Yeah.
And the core idea, the big shift, was about separating income from just hours clocked.
Yeah.
Decoupling them.
Which brings us neatly to his concept of the new rich, the NR, he calls them. And like you said, forget the mansions and private jets for a minute. For Ferriss, the new rich aren't defined by how much money they have in total.
No, it's about something else. It's their relative income. So basically, how many dollars they earn per hour.
And the freedom that gives them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. You've got person A, works maybe 80 hours a week, earns $50,000 a year. Standard grind.
Okay.
Then there's person B, earns the same $50,000, but only works 10 hours a week.
Wow.
In Ferriss's world, person B is way richer. Their time is just vastly more valuable. It's all about getting maximum results with minimum time.
Right. And this just completely turns the traditional retirement plan on its head, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The whole idea of working flat out until you're 65, hoping you've saved enough, hoping you've still got the health to enjoy it, Ferriss basically says that model is fundamentally broken.
Why broken?
Well, he points out the risks. Many people, even after saving for decades, might not even be able to keep up their standard of living. And even for those who do make a lot of money through pure hard work, he asks, okay, what happens then? He reckons many would just get incredibly bored and probably start looking for some kind of work again anyway.
Kind of defeats the purpose of waiting all those years. He uses a funny phrase about the potential for extreme boredom, too, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. It's quite vivid.
Okay, so the old work hard now, play later idea out. Ferriss proposes a different path, the DEAL framework.
Right. DEL.
Ugh.
Think of it as the 4 main steps to building this new rich lifestyle he talks about.
And D is for?
D is for definition.
Yeah.
But this isn't about fuzzy dreams. It's about getting really, really specific about the life you actually want. What does your ideal day, your ideal week look like?
Exactly. He really pushes for SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, applying that not just to work, but to your whole lifestyle.
And then there's this exercise he calls dreamlining.
Dreamlining. Okay, tell us about that.
So dreamlining is where you take those big dreams and you actually break them down into concrete monthly income targets.
Yeah, okay.
It covers different kinds of goals, like having goals, maybe owning a particular car, being goals like becoming fluent in Spanish, maybe, and doing goals, perhaps finally taking that surfing trip.
Got it. Having, being, doing.
And the crucial part is calculating the real monthly cost for each one. And what often happens, he says, is when you actually run the numbers.
It's less than he thought.
Often, yeah. Suddenly those big dreams seem much less intimidating financially. It removes a huge mental block for people.
Yeah, the book has that sample calculation, doesn't it? Puts real figures against things like, I don't know, an Aston Martin, learning Greek, selling old gear. It makes it feel tangible.
Exactly. It stops being just a fantasy. But then, okay, you've got these goals, but what about actually doing something? We all procrastinate.
Ah, yes, inertia.
So Ferriss introduces fear setting.
Fear setting sounds intense.
It's actually pretty practical.
Yeah.
It's about clearly defining the absolute worst-case scenario. What's the rock bottom if you go for it and, well, it doesn't work out?
He has that funny example, right? Worrying you'll end up having to, like, steal lunch money or something ridiculous.
Yeah. The point is, when you really spell out your fears, even the slightly absurd ones, you usually realize they're not world-ending. They're manageable. Just bumps in the road, as he puts it.
Right, and he contrasts this with optimistic denial.
Yeah, where you just assume everything will magically work out so you don't actually do anything. He argues whether you're too pessimistic or too optimistic, if you don't act, the result is the same. No progress.
Okay, here's another really interesting bit. He talks about this comfort challenge at Princeton.
Oh, yeah, the round-trip ticket.
Tell us about that. He offered a ticket anywhere in the world.
For completing some undefined challenge, yeah. And the first time he did it, even with super smart students, a lot of them just froze, didn't do anything. But the next year, after he really pushed this idea of embracing the unrealistic, way more students jumped in and actually did amazing things, quickly.
Which leads him to this kind of paradoxical idea.
And that doing the unrealistic is easier than doing the realistic.
How does that work?
Well, his reasoning is there's just less competition for the really big, audacious goals. Most people assume they can't do it, so they aim lower for the realistic stuff.
Which, ironically, creates way more competition in those areas.
Exactly. Everyone's fighting for the same achievable slice.
Interesting. Okay, so we've defined our ideal life, faced our fears. What's next in deal?
Next up is elimination. This is all about being super strategic with your time and energy, maximizing your productivity by, kind of counterintuitively, doing less.
Doing less to achieve more. Okay.
And the core principle here is the 80-20 rule, Pareto's law.
Right. The idea that like 80% of your results often come from 20% of your efforts.
Precisely. He gives his own business example, finding out that just 3% of his customers were actually responsible for 95% of his revenue.
Wow. That's extreme.
It forces you to look hard at where the real value is coming from. And this applies just as much to how you spend your time. We've even seen people apply it to, like, personal relationships, figuring out the 20% of interactions that bring 80% of the happiness.
Focus on what matters.
And he has this great line, being busy is often a form of laziness.
Ooh, controversial. Explain that.
Well, it's the idea that we often fill our days with busy work, reorganizing email folders, tweaking spreadsheets because it feels productive.
But it lets us avoid the few really important, maybe difficult tasks that actually move the needle.
Exactly. It's lazy thinking, he argues.
So the advice is to ruthlessly prioritize.
Yeah. Focus on the important few. He suggests aiming for maybe just 1 or 2 major goals per day, max.
And forget multitasking.
Definitely. He argues it just leads to more interruptions, worse results, and feeling less satisfied overall. Divided attention doesn't work.
He also talks about a low-information diet, right? Tuning out the constant news cycle.
Yeah, he questions whether we really need to be plugged into every single breaking news story. He shares how he personally went long stretches barely reading newspapers or watching TV news.
And the world didn't end.
Apparently not. His point is, most of it isn't directly relevant or actionable for your immediate goals.
So practical tips for this elimination phase.
Things like batching similar tasks together, like handling all your emails in one go, setting really firm deadlines, and getting good at saying no to things that don't align with your priorities.
He even suggests putting up a sign asking yourself, are you inventing things to do to avoid the important?
Yeah, a constant reminder.
And what about people in regular jobs? Can they eliminate?
He talks a lot about negotiating remote work, framing it not as just wanting to work at home, but as a way to actually boost your productivity.
By cutting out the commute, office distractions.
Exactly. He shares the story of Sherwood, who proposed a 2-week trial run to his boss, focusing purely on the potential for more output.
Prove it works.
Yeah. And he also mentions this hourglass approach.
Hourglass.
Taking a longer initial break, maybe a few weeks, to really demonstrate you can be super productive away from the office. It builds a stronger case for making it permanent or more frequent.
Okay, makes sense. So we've defined, we've eliminated. What's A?
A is for automation. This is where you start outsourcing tasks to free up even more of your time.
Right, like getting someone else to do the stuff you've identified as necessary, but maybe not the best use of your specific skills or time, like maybe compiling market research.
Exactly. Something a virtual assistant could handle, freeing you up for the analysis part.
So virtual assistants, VAs, that's a big part of this.
Huge. He really highlights how cost-effective they can be, especially assistants based in places like India or the Philippines, where rates could be, $4, $5, up to maybe $15 an hour for skilled help.
What kind of tasks can they do?
A whole range.
Yeah.
Market research, definitely. Scheduling appointments, managing your calendar, booking travel, even personal errands.
He has that funny story about outsourcing worry, right?
Yeah. Asking his assistant, Honey, to literally take on the worrying about some stalled business deal for him. It sounds absurd, but it highlights the principle.
But first he says, eliminate before you delegate.
Crucial point. Don't just outsource tasks that shouldn't be done at all. Make sure it's necessary first. He talks about using spam filters and autoresponders himself to cut down his own email time before even thinking about delegating it.
And he uses the Howard Hughes examples too, right? To show the sheer range of things you could potentially outsource.
Yeah, some pretty eccentric stuff Hughes apparently had his assistants do, just to illustrate the point that the possibilities are broad.
Okay, but what about security? People might worry about handing over information.
He addresses that. He mentions that reputable VA firms often have pretty strict security protocols, sometimes even better than what you might have on your own computer. You need to vet them, of course.
And he gives tips on how to actually give tasks to VAs effectively.
Yes, very practical advice. Contrasting a really vague first attempt with a much clearer, specific instruction, like how to find magazine editors who'd also written books. Specificity is key.
Got it. Clear instructions get clear results. This leads into the idea of muses, doesn't it?
Right. Muses are his term for automated businesses that generate income but require very little of your time on an ongoing basis.
Like they run themselves.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Often these businesses don't even handle manufacturing or shipping or customer service directly. They automate or outsource those functions. They're designed for minimal owner involvement.
So what makes a good muse business? What are the criteria?
He suggests focusing on niche markets, products or services that are easy to explain online, maybe with a really good FAQ section, and crucially, things that can be produced or fulfilled relatively quickly, like 3 to 4 weeks max.
And what types of muses are there?
2 main types he discusses are reselling existing products, often using drop shipping, so you never handle the inventory,
Okay.
and creating your own information products, things like ebooks, online courses, guides.
And he prefers info products.
He highlights their advantages, yeah. Much faster to create, generally, and harder for competitors to just copy directly.
So how do you know if your muse idea is any good before you invest a lot?
Testing. He advocates using tools like Google AdWords to send a small amount of paid traffic to a simple test page. See if people actually click buy. Track those conversion rates.
Real-world validation. He gives examples, right? Johanna selling DVDs, Sherwood with the French shirts.
Exactly. Proving demand before building the whole thing out.
And then there's this idea of lose-win guarantees. What's that?
That's a powerful sales technique. Instead of just offering a standard money-back guarantee.
You offer more.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
Johanna offered a full refund, and the customer got to keep a bonus DVD if they weren't satisfied with their main flexibility product. Sherwood offered double your money back if his shirts weren't the most comfortable you'd ever worn.
Sounds risky, but he says it boosted sales significantly.
Dramatically, yeah. It removes almost all the risk for the buyer and shows incredible confidence in the product.
Okay. And then you automate the rest with things like call centers, payment processors.
Right, building that whole automated architecture so the sales and fulfillment happen without you needing to be hands-on daily.
Okay, so we've defined, eliminated, automated. Brings us to the final letter.
L is for liberation. This is about actually escaping the 9-to-5 grind, breaking free from the office, and creating that location independence.
And he uses Dave's story here, the guy at HP.
Yeah, Dave's successfully negotiated working remotely, not just from home, but from China, so he could be with his partner.
It's a pretty big leap.
It really shows it's possible, even of big corporations, if you approach it strategically.
And the key, again, Ferriss stresses, is quantifying the benefits for the company.
Absolutely. Showing how remote work will lead to increased productivity, better results for them. It can't just be about what you want.
Makes sense. He talks about the practicalities, too, the disappearing act.
Things like forwarding your work phone, using remote desktop software, basically setting things up so you can function effectively from anywhere.
And he tackles the fears around quitting a job, too. Financial worries, resume gaps.
Yeah, he offers counterarguments, suggesting that the risks of staying in an unfulfilling job might be greater and framing career breaks differently.
And instead of just short holidays, he advocates for mini retirements.
Right. Not just a 2-week vacation, but actually relocating somewhere for, say, 1 to 6 months.
Why longer?
Deeper immersion, he argues. really experience a place. And often, it can actually be cheaper than living at home, depending on where you go. He compares his costs in places like Buenos Aires or Berlin to living in the U.S.
Interesting. And he kind of brushes off common excuses not to travel, like safety or having kids.
Yeah, he basically argues most fears are overblown and there are ways to manage them. Kids, he suggests, can be incredibly adaptable and benefit hugely from the experience.
And practical tips for planning these mini retirements.
Lots of those. Using travel reward points from credit cards, finding cheap flights, setting up bank accounts abroad, downgrading phone plans, using Skype or similar tools for communication.
Getting your logistics sorted.
Yeah, and also decluttering before you go, getting rid of stuff you don't need. But then there's a really important point he makes. What happens after you achieve all this time? Freedom.
Right. The filling the void problem.
Exactly. If your whole identity was tied up in work, what do you do when that's drastically reduced? You need new goals, new passions.
So what does he suggest?
Things like learning a new language, which he says is great for sharpening your thinking anyway, or finding ways to contribute service to others, things that provide meaning beyond just earning money.
Finding purpose outside the traditional work structure.
And then he wraps up with a list. The top 13 new rich mistakes, which kind of reinforces all the key lessons.
Okay, so pulling it all together then, the big takeaway seems to be that designing a life with way more freedom, time freedom, location freedom, it's actually possible.
Yeah, it's not just a fantasy, but it requires a different way of thinking, redefining wealth.
Eliminating the fluff, the inefficiencies.
Automating your income.
And embracing these periods of liberation, these mini retirements.
Yeah, it's a deliberate design process.
And that leads us to a pretty powerful thought to leave you, the listener, with. It comes from an excerpt at the end of the source material, a letter called Slow Dance.
Oh yeah, written by a young woman who was terminally ill. It's very moving.
It really is. And a couple of lines really stand out. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last.
And then, when you run so fast to get somewhere, you miss half the fun of getting there.
Wow. That really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? About the pace you're living at right now.
Are you so focused on that end goal, whatever it is, that you're kind of missing the journey, missing the now?
Yeah. So maybe, just maybe, the best thing to take from all this today is to find one small thing you can actually do.
Just one actionable step.
Yeah.
Maybe it's taking 5 minutes to define one dreamline goal. Put a cost to it.
Or maybe identifying one time-wasting habit you have, checking email constantly, scrolling news feeds, and deciding to cut back on it starting now.
Yeah. We'd really encourage you to think about these ideas, maybe revisit your own relationship with how you spend your time, how you approach work.
It's about consciously designing the life you want, isn't it? Rather than just accepting the default path. Something to definitely chew on.